So I guess first off, before we want to try to shoot the bow through paper, it's really helpful to try to eliminate some issues before you even get to that point in your process. I get a lot of times where people come in and they say, hey, I need help paper tuning my bow. Well, the reality of it is their strings are 4 years old, they've got center serving separation, they're getting knock pinch, their cams might be way out of time. So I really think it's important to start with a well-tuned bow before you try, or a bow that things are close to center shot level, your cams are in time, and that gives us a good starting point before we ever try to shoot through paper. I do recommend that you take your bow, we can do a basic tune-up, a standard tune-up here at the shop on your bow to get it ready for that next step of the process. Some people, that is a finishing point, and that's fine. Some people might be newer to archery, might have some struggles with their form, and if they're having issues, your broadheads will tell you if there's tuning issues with your bow. So some people might just jump straight to that process, and that's fine. And if you shoot a mechanical, some of this process may not even be something that you need to waste a ton of time on. As far as a good basic tune on the bow, there's things that we can see that become really problematic when you're trying to get your bow to shoot good. Obviously, if your center serving is worn, we need to fix that. If your strings and cables are tired, this time of year, I really suggest that we replace them if we're getting close to that point, because by the time we shoot throughout the summer and everything, a lot of times people are in the need for that. But if your strings are, let's say, a year old and they're still in good condition, I'm not seeing a lot of stretch to them, any separation around your cams, we can replace this center serving, make sure that you've got good knock fit, and some of those sort of things to try to help this next part of the process go a lot more smoothly. Let's say you drop your bow off for a standard tune-up. We get it shooting really good for our machine. That does not necessarily mean that it is going to shoot perfectly for you. We may need to take some of our next steps to get that bow shooting really good through paper for you. And another thing, as we start to talk about that part of the process, paper tuning is one more step to the process. That is a starting point. The next step beyond that is trying to get your broadheads to fly good, which is doing some broadhead tuning. And we'll talk about that part of the process later on. So this stuff can feel really daunting sometimes, and if you go just cold turkey with a bow that has multiple issues going on, a lot of times I'll run into 3 or 4 minor things that all add up to a bow not shooting well through paper. And like I said, a lot of times it's 3 or 4 things. So just cold turkey trying to move your rest or something like that. If you just walk in the store, I may suggest that we do a tune-up to your bow, because a lot of times there's multiple components that are causing that tear, and if we just move your rest, like what you see and what the paper tuning guides show, we're just going to chase our tails. So first we're going to suggest that we start off with a standard tune-up, and we can definitely talk about some of that and maybe include that in some of our videos. Once your bow is through that standard tune-up process, we can talk a little bit about paper tuning the bow. So paper tuning problems. A lot of times I've found when we're getting one of these tears, I've found a lot of times it can really be the person. I have seen people with as much as a 1.5 inch tear through paper, where the bow was shooting, we had done a standard tune-up on the bow, everything was pretty good, but the reality of it is there was some other component to the archer's form that we needed to address. Facial pressure, if you have a lot of facial pressure on the string, that can cause a major tear. Another thing is I have seen where just too much tension on your release hand can cause a pretty severe tear. Improper grip position, or maybe not so much improper grip position as just someone being tense. And some of these things I can just tune the bow to how the archer shoots, but there's some things that we really need to correct their form. So that is where we are going to spend some time, possibly on form, possibly on shimming the cams on the bow, either direction, and possibly a combination of both. So I think when you start to address paper tuning, I think the biggest thing I think that we need to understand is that there needs to be some patience involved in it, because Sometimes it is it takes me 5 minutes to get the bow shooting good for the paper for a person, and sometimes we might spend over an hour. So if you want to take that next step to get your broadheads to fly good, we want to get this to a bullet hole through the paper. And that's going to start with most likely my recommendation of a standard tune-up on the bow. And then the next step is that we're going to spend some time together doing paper tuning. So we may do that as a special appointment, or we may do it during our business hours, but we'll kind of look at the individual situation and how busy we are at the time before we take that on. So before we get to our broadhead tuning, we want to be very close to a perfect bullet hole through the paper. So these are some of the tears that you can encounter when you're paper tuning, and sometimes that tear is a combination of both up and down and left and right. And so we're going to address, most likely we're going to address the left and right first, and then we'll address the up and down. And those tears can, if we've done a standard tune-up on the bow, we've already eliminated a lot of those issues. For example, a left and right tear, we may be able to, if it's really close, if it's much smaller than this, if it's tiny, that's where I would move a rest. But if that tear is large, we're going to start looking at some of the tuning capabilities we have with the bow to address that. So we're talking about tuning a bow to your hand, what the tear is doing. So if you're getting a tail left tear, let's say it's that big, it's hopefully not, right? But if we're getting a tail left tear, we've already done a standard tune up on the bow, we know this rest is close to center shot, we are going to shift your cams the direction of the tear. So you're shooting tail left, so we want to shift our cams to the left. So every bow has its own specific way of tuning that. Some bows it's yokes, some bows it's shims. And I guess the other thing I would say is we're going to also make sure it's not your facial pressure, your hand position, or your grip. A tail high or a tail low tear, again, we want to make sure that your cams are in time. Occasionally a tail low tear I've ran into being an arrow spine issue. But when we do a standard tune-up on the bow, we're making sure that a lot of these issues are already eliminated, and I'm paying attention to what the arrow spine is like. I might see if the bow likes a stiffer arrow if I'm encountering this. So I really think by the time we get past the point of a standard tune-up, we're going to already have a lot of these issues eliminated. Okay, so this is the Darton Tritech. This is my hunting bow for this year. So as far as shifting cams on a Darton Tritech, we have several different options. So we have these little limb adjustment nuts here, and if, let's say, I was getting a tail left tear out of this bow, we have micro tuning options for left and right by changing the deflection on the limb with this little limb adjustment nut, and they're on the top and the bottom. A tail left tear, I would take tension out of this nut, and I would potentially need to move it over to this other side and tighten it down. So in order to eliminate a left tear, we would need to have a little bit less tension on this limb and a little more on that. So depending on where you're at, you do have probably about a 1/2 inch of adjustment with these limb adjustment nuts. Now, if you do have a more severe tear than that, we still may need to shim cams, but it's only occasionally I really need to do that. The other thing on this bow that we have is a micro adjustable roller guard. So we can actually move our roller guard in order to also try to clean up that tear. You can move your roller guard to also adjust, make some small micro left and right adjustments. Now, if again, if you need to make major adjustments, you may still need to shim a cam, and Darton has a shim kit. We have one here at the shop, but I would say the majority of people are going to be able to clean up their tears just with these limb adjustment nuts. And the nice thing about these is this is something you can do without a bow press in the field. So if you can get your bow shooting a bullet hole through paper, you should be able to get your bow broadhead tuned with these limb adjustment nuts, because these do small amounts. So before we ever broadhead tune, we want to be really close to a bullet hole through the paper, because broadhead tuning is basically we're putting a magnifying glass on what it's doing through paper. Broadheads can be a little bit finicky. They kind of tend to fly similar to a bear shaft, and so as far as having them fly well, we do want to start with a bow that's shooting really close to a bullet hole through paper, or you're going to chase your tail. Okay, let's say tail left, tear through paper. On this bow, we have a locking nut, and we are going to loosen that, and we are going to, see this tuning screw here? We are going to shift our cams. On a tail left tear, we would shift our cams to the left to resolve that. So we're going to do the same thing on the top and on the bottom.
So you would tighten that down?
So you would turn it. It doesn't really tighten, it just turns.
Okay.
And you can see they've got some little reference marks on here too, so you know how much you've gone. And you're going to want to go even on the top and the bottom. So the cool thing about the Bowtech, as opposed to some of the others, is this has a full range of movement to it, and we're never going to have to shim a cam because it has the full range of movement that we need just with these screws. So you basically never have to put this bow in the press to make those adjustments, which is kind of cool. Beats the heck out of shimming a cam.
Yeah.
This is the PSE Mach 30. PSE's tuning system is really, really easy. So easy they call it the Easy 220 system. So there is little numbers on these little plastic pieces here. These little plastic pieces here, they have a number. It's really hard to see, but that number should add up to 220. That's why they call it the Easy 220 system. So from the factory, it's got a 1 and a 120 in there, and I have all different sizes if we end up needing to do some tuning to the specific bow. These, you do put the bow in the press, but it's really quick. It takes probably a minute to pop them out, shift the cams, and get them where they would need to be. So for example, if this bow was shooting tail left through the paper, we can look, my failing aging eyes here, but this is a 1 on this side, and this is a 1.2 on the other side. So to fix a tail left tear, we would actually go to our shim kit, our kit that we have, and we would pick out a smaller number to go on the left and a bigger number to go on the right. If it was a tail right tear, if it was not a very big tear, all we would need to do would be to flip these little, put the one that's on the left on the right and vice versa. So you would do that on the top and the bottom. So the Easy 220 system is exactly what it is. It's easy to adjust, and you're adjusting in increments as opposed to some of these bows you can make fine tuning, but the fine tuning on this bow, you would move the rest.